He's Jonathan Casillas. I'm Lance Medow with you for the next 60 minutes. In multiple ways you'd interact with us here on the program. You give us a ring, 201-939-4513. You can also find us on Twitter, #GiantsChat. And a reminder, you can find the archive of this show and our entire podcast network on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at Giants.com/podcast. So we have a jam-packed show today, as we're going to focus on 3 more schools as we inch closer to the NFL draft. And right off the top, we are heading towards Big Ten country, as we will focus on the Minnesota Golden Gophers. And to break down this year's class, we're joined by former Minnesota running back. He's now the current radio analyst for the Golden Gophers, none other than Darrell Thompson. Darrell, you got Lance Medow, Jonathan Casillas here on Giants.com, Big Blue Kickoff Live. Greatly appreciate the time today. Hope all is well. How's everything on your end?
Things are good. Appreciate you guys having me on today.
Absolutely. Pleasure having you on the program. And I want to start with a position that could very well, Darrell, interest the Giants, and that's the center position, given the fact that they lost 2 players in free agency. And that brings us to John Michael Schmitz, 6'4", 310, projected to be one of the first 2 centers taken off the board. He's been a consistent starter over the last 4 seasons and seems to be a mauler in the run game. But how would you compare his run blocking to his pass protection from what you saw during his tenure at Minnesota?
I think it's improved. I think it's one of the things that Coach Fleck and the offensive line coach, Callahan, wanted to work with him to improve that, and he's improved. He kind of, early he didn't play a lot, but over the course of time, he's just improved and very, very physical in the run game, and then, in the passing game, he's just improved. And the passing game is just a little bit more technical and difficult. Anyway, just got to be stronger and more stout, but he's improved and he's worked on it. I think he can certainly have a nice NFL career.
With respect to the age, I know every time we see a prospect who is about 23, 24 years old entering the NFL, everybody gets concerned, well, maybe there's too much mileage in the tank at this point. He's going to be 24 when his NFL career starts. Any red flag there, Darrell, in terms of how he's a little bit older than most prospects at this time when they enter the league?
I don't think so, especially not with the modern game. They don't practice like they did back in the 80s, 90s, early 2000s in college or professionally. So I just don't think the wear and tear is going to be an issue. He's not been an injury-prone player. I actually kind of like guys like that. They're seasoned. They know what's going on. They don't get caught up in the flash and the glitter. They appreciate where they are and what's going on. They don't probably want to go out and run around at night as much as some of the younger guys. So I think that, John Michael Schmitz is one of those guys that I don't think he'll hurt you at all. I think that seasoning on him is just what you want, just like that chili always tastes better the next day. He's one of those guys. Hopefully he's a little bit better the next day.
I like it. Being a former Big Ten player myself, linebacker, of course, for the University of Wisconsin, a lot of linemen come out the Big Ten, and they're pretty much NFL ready, especially Wisconsin and Minnesota, you name it. The schools, they're like putting out guys that are ready. I guess what's the difference between maybe the Big Ten and the SEC or other, big powerhouse schools that, guys are coming out the Big Ten, especially on the offensive line, kind of ready to go?
I think it's just the focus. It's so interesting. You make a good point, and I really like watching. I'm a former running back, so I appreciate offensive line, but I like watching the line at Wisconsin, and I really like watching the offensive line at Iowa. 2 lines that just work in sync. It just looks like those guys are working together, eating together, lifting weights together, going on dates together. They're doing everything together because they just move in tandem. We do a good job, a really good job at Minnesota, but the commitment to the offensive line, from Badgers, from prior to my area through your era to right now is certainly really strong. It's similar to Iowa, and we've got a commitment to it here, but the legacy of the Wisconsin and the Iowa linemen, you can probably barely turn a game on the weekend and not see either a Wisconsin or Iowa offensive lineman on the field for one of the teams.
Darrell, when it comes to offensive linemen, usually when they have versatility, it's a little bit more appealing. And what I mean by that is maybe they don't just play center. You can move them to guard. You can play guard, tackle. John Michael Schmitz obviously has been mainly at center over the course of his career, but maybe teams coming in who have a center want to bring him in and move him around. How much player movement do you think he has on the line as he makes the next step to the NFL?
He did play some guards, early in his career, and I think, he was just the best at center that we had. So, he's just going to kind of stay there and do your thing. But typically, a lot of times, and he has the size. He's not super small. So, him being 6'4" is, a good height, to be able to move and to be that guard spot as well. I doubt he can go out and play the tackle, but I'm pretty confident he can probably play guard and help the team there in a pinch situation. I don't know if that'd be like the long-term type of thing, but I think he could, get you through a game or maybe get you through 2 games like that if he had to.
Yeah, I love what you said about, the linemen going on dates. With my experience, the offensive line, they're always like not a standalone group, but they're definitely a group that rocks out together. I think of the movie Troy and his Achilles, his group of guys that were like the front leaders of the war. That's what old linemen are. And I think Wisconsin does a great job. Iowa, you mentioned Minnesota. I think they do a real job in kind of nourishing those relationships within the organization or team. And I think that translates over very, very well to the NFL. So I think the Giants have that kind of atmosphere here. And, I definitely see, my man fitting in, well to the Giants, because the Giants, number one, they get a lot of criticism here, especially along the offensive line, because of what they've done in history, So I expect him to come in and, of course, the Giants have a, 25th pick overall. They also have a pick in the second round. But, seeing where he ends up at, I think he'll have some success. I was looking at his stats and his numbers, and he's been a long-time starter, and he's played a lot of good football. And, that's what people are looking for here on the NFL level. Not only can you do well at your position, but can you fit into the group when you're called and you're brought into this, this brotherhood of men and another brotherhood of the offensive line inside of the brotherhood of the NFL?
Absolutely. You guys know you had a great one there from Minnesota that made my job easy he left when I was a sophomore. Brian Williams was a tremendous center for you guys with the Giants. So, that's I'm sure that John Michael Smith will be honored to follow in that tradition and those footsteps.
Initially, I thought Jonathan was making a parallel to Brad Pitt with his Troy film reference. I was going to ask you, Darrell, if maybe you could build some type of a parallel with Eric Bana or Brad Pitt, who starred in Troy with John Michael Schmitz. But we're not going to put you on the spot like that. Jonathan, he likes to throw out his curveballs. I'm just warning you. You don't know where this conversation is going to go as a result. But in all seriousness, we focused a lot on the offensive line, but let's move to a position that you also know very well, and that's the running back position. And they have Mo Ibrahim, who's 5'8", 203. I know he's projected to go maybe later in terms of the NFL draft, but here's a guy that ruptured his left Achilles, overcame that, seems to be a really good pass protector. What's jumped out to you about his production during his tenure in Minnesota?
Well, number one, his toughness. Mo he's an old school. He would have been completely fine. I think John Michael Smith, any of these guys we talk about would have been fine in any era, but Mo's tough. He's a throwback. He played on an ankle this year that was sore, and still, had over 1,000 yards. And I think the thing about him that I like is he always gets more than what it's blocked for. And if you're a running back coach, or someone that appreciates running backs, I don't want you to just get the plays blocked for 3 yards. I'm expecting 4 yards, 5 yards, 6 yards. I'm expecting you to go 12 yards and break a tackle or something like that. There's this thing about, everyone needs to be fast and run like, a 4.3, 4.40. Emmitt Smith, Walter Payton, the greatest backs of all time, they weren't burners. They got yards and they got extra yards. And Mohamed Ibrahim, he gets yards, he gets extra yards, and he's tough. He's the type of back I'd like to have. And unfortunately for him, he's going to slide down a little bit just because of the value of running backs has changed over the course of time. Now they're kind of like,
sure,
if we can get him in the, I don't know, whatever they have him like on 4th round or something like that, he should be a 2nd round pick or maybe even a 1st round pick. But right now, the way things are, and his ruptured Achilles last year, I understand that. But he came back and proved that is fine. Proved he's tough, that he can pass block and he can catch the ball and he can he's patient. He stays in the film room, so he's going to be a really, really nice catch for whomever decides they want to add him in their backfield.
He seems like he could be a diminutive guy, not a big guy, right? But he had over 300 carries this year. That's something to prove after Achilles and Lance. That's something I'm overcoming right now. But luckily, I don't have to tackle anybody or break any tackles. That's a great thing. But I'm looking, he only had 7 receptions this year out the backfield. Do you know why that is? He had over 300 carries, 1,600 rushing yards, but only 7 receptions this year. Do you know why they've only, targeted him a few times to only have 7 receptions?
We had a lot of receivers they liked getting ball to, and it just wasn't part of the attack for them.
Mm-hmm.
We do a lot of them that kind of, obviously what everybody's doing now, the RPO, the read option, and he is gets so much attention. It probably, we ran some screens and things like that. If we can catch the ball out the backfield, just wasn't a focus. But I could see, somebody like a Dallas or maybe even you guys, because he's going to be available later. So it's not going to cost the team a lot, but he'd be a great supplemental back, and then maybe he becomes a primer back, like a Pollard or someone else, down the line to say, well, once we try him out and he comes in for a little bit, he might be your horse, for 3 years, 5 years. Running back shelf life is obviously a lot different than the majority of other positions on the field.
Plus, most teams go with running backs by committee, so it makes sense to groom somebody. Perhaps if you lose a player 2 or 3 years down the road, you have somebody in-house who has at least some mileage left in the tank with respect to some gas. As he is Darrell Thompson, former Minnesota running back, current radio analyst for the Golden Gophers. Darrell, greatly appreciate the time and the insight, and we very much look forward to talking to you down the road. Thanks for hopping on the program.
Thanks. You guys have a great day. Take care.
You
too,
as well.
Darrell.
So 1 of 3 stops on today's program. We are going fast and furious as we continue to get you set for the 2023 NFL Draft. And it's only a smooth transition considering we just were talking about running backs that we now bring in Matt Stevens, former UCLA quarterback, who you could hear on the Bruins radio network. He's their color analyst as we jump into the UCLA draft class. Matt, you got Lance Medow, Jonathan Casillas here on Giants.com, Big Blue Kickoff Live. Greatly appreciate the time. Hope all is well. How's everything on your end?
Yeah, doing great. Out here in California where it's always snowing and raining and very cold.
Well, we can clearly relate to that, Matt.
Whatever. It's 30 degrees here. Whatever.
Yeah.
Our thoughts and prayers are with you, Matt, to somehow get through Mother Nature. I know it's very strenuous and difficult on you, but let's bring it back to some X's and O's. We were just talking about the Minnesota draft class, and we were focusing on one of their running backs, and that's where I want to start with UCLA because I think the player to watch is Zach Charbonnet, who's the transfer from Michigan. And when you're looking for an all-around back, Matt, somebody that can catch the ball out of the backfield, can pile up the yardage, I think Zach fits under that label. How much do you think whichever team ultimately drafts him is going to get an all-around back where there's no question about whether or not you should take him off the field on third down?
Well, I've seen Zach Charbonnet play in high school, and then obviously I commentated him in college. He's a workhorse. I mean, he can carry the ball anywhere between 25 and 32 times a game. He's very durable. He never seems to take a big hit. He's a big guy, too, 6'2", 220, 225. I was very surprised that he ran a 4.5 in the combine. I think that's great. I mean, that showed that he can pull away from people. And he can make guys miss in the open field. Has a great pair of hands catching the ball. He was used a lot, with UCLA in terms of all-purpose yards, catching the ball. He's a great blocker on blitz protection. I mean, whoever gets him, it's a steal because he's going to be a 10-year NFL guy.
Wow, that's a lot to say, especially at that position. So where do you see him landing? Because that running back position, which I don't like that the running back position is devalued as much as it is, dealing with the Saquon, franchise tag and his number, and I don't like it. But I found a lot of value in running backs because I was a guy that had to tackle running backs my whole career and cover these guys. Where do you see him landing in the draft this year?
The projections are third or fourth round. I mean, it's just because he is that running back, and that's how they select him later in the round. But like I said, I mean, you're going to get a steal. I mean, I really, if he goes to the Giants, yes, he's going to be a backup running back, but he's also going to be a 1-2 punch. You can use him in so many different ways. And I think the things that you like about him, I mean, he can get the tough yards, he can make people miss, but he does those other little things like block that are so important to any kind of offense. And, when you have a guy that's smart, willing to do everything at running back, I mean, he's a valuable player.
Well, I'm glad you brought up the blocking aspect because I think that's something we focus on no matter the running back in terms of can you trust him to protect your quarterback. What specifically jumped out to you about his pass protection? How much do you think he's improved during the course of his development in that department?
Well, Chip Kelly, he's one of those guys. His first statement about running backs is, no block, no rock. So that's the first thing that Zach did. And he's one of those big kind of guys that can block with leverage. So if you got a blitzing linebacker coming off the edge, no one's touched him. He's going to stone him. Right there. He's willing to put his body in front of a defender to protect his quarterback. And then he's very good with his feet. Probably the best thing about Zach Charbonnet, for a big guy, he's got real quick feet, real quick steps. And not only is that good for running, but it's really good for blocking. And that's what really helps Zach Charbonnet.
Absolutely. And with that size, look, sometimes you're not going right into the league at that position and playing right away. Sometimes you got to feel your way on special teams. So he looks like with his size and his measurables, depending if he got a screw or two loose, because you kind of need a screw or two loose to play football in general, and then maybe an extra screw loose to play on special teams. Do you think he fits into that kickoff type mold, or maybe even like a punt returner or punt coverer? Do you think he fits into that mold?
Yeah, I don't think he's going to receive punts or take back kickoffs or anything like that. That's not his personality, but he can be an up back or a blocker, and he will be a willing guy on special teams. He comes from a great high school, Oaks Christian, where they, won a lot of football games, went to Michigan, went to UCLA. He's a high football IQ guy. And you could see Chip Kelly, he did a lot of things with him. In terms of, running routes, check releases. He was running wide receiver routes. He can line up out wide as a wide receiver. He can get in and almost catch the ball like a tight end over the middle. When you have a high IQ guy that's had a lot of football under his belt, and he's very durable. I can't say that more than enough. Very durable. For some reason, he doesn't seem to take big hits, and he always makes that first guy miss. But, when you have a high IQ and you're going to get to the NFL, you're very valuable.
Speaking of playing the trenches, I want to move to the offensive line, and Antonio Mafi is somebody that played both guard spots, got tremendous size at 6'4", 338, but I think maybe there's a little bit of rawness, Matt, still to him, and maybe question marks about where he could fit in on the next level. So, A, what position do you think is his strongest suit, and how far along has he come with respect to his development?
He's a guard. He's not a tackle, and I don't think he can snap the ball. He was probably the best player to watch last year at UCLA in terms of run blocking. He can. If he goes one direction, he's going to take out two or three guys. He plays with real good leverage, and his body shape keeps him low, so he doesn't attack people high. One thing he has to improve on is pass protection. He's worked at the whole year. He has to get quicker feet. I'm not saying he has slow feet, but, he needs quicker feet and pass protection. And his football IQ just has to be raised up a level because he only played offensive line for about a year and a half, 2 years at UCLA, coming from that defensive line position. So the more experience he gets, the better he's going to be. But you're not going to find a better run blocker coming out of the draft.
Oh, wow. That's high praise, man. And for a guy that, I guess, commuted over from defense to offense, I think that takes a little while. We were talking earlier with the guy from Minnesota talking about the brotherhood of the offensive line. And the Giants have a good brotherhood here, and I'm pretty sure they're going to, get together, and a lot of guys have to improve. So you get him on a good team, man, with a good offensive line, with a good leader and a good captain on that offensive line. He's definitely going to improve, especially on the intangibles, because he probably has the tangibles to line up and, push some guys off the ball and even pass block as well. But the intangibles will probably come in his career as long as he's down to work and to get with the program.
Yeah, you know what? Antonio Mafi, too, is a great guy. He really enjoys the game. He's always laughing. He's always having fun. He does some things out there where, you're like, be careful, you're going to get a personal foul. He has a little mean streak in him. But in terms of bonding with all the players, he was probably one of the most popular players on the team, and that really goes a long way.
I know they have a few other players that are projected to be undrafted free agents, but the one guy, Matt, that I'm curious about, only because he has a connection to the Giants quarterback, and that is Jake Bobo, the wide receiver, who coincidentally was with Daniel Jones in 2018. It just goes to show you what a small world it is. He transferred from Duke, and his numbers have improved every single year, and you could argue he's coming off one of his finest seasons from a statistical standpoint. It clearly has the size, may not have the speed. Where do you see his biggest appeal skill set-wise at the receiver position?
Probably playing that slot receiver position. When you want to work the middle with a tight end and a slot receiver. He's a big body, He can catch the ball in traffic. He plucks it out of the air. He can fight for a football. He has great leaping ability, good body control. I think the one thing that, he has to improve on is speed. So I don't see him being a burner on the outside. I see him more of a slot receiver on the inside.
Yeah, I'm looking at his weight, 206 at 6'4". Did he improve his weight at all at the combine?
No, I mean that's just his frame. He's very long.
Yeah, long
and
guy.
He's pretty thin. Yeah, and he has really long arms, and he can go up and get the football. Got a great pair of hands. His speed is his big question mark.
What about his physicality? Because I've seen guys with that measurable, not the weight really, maybe a little bit heavier, that converts to like that H-back tight end position. Then also, we talked about earlier, playing special teams. For me, I was an undrafted guy, and I played special teams early in my career. Some of these guys, man, that come in, especially later draft picks, undrafted guys, they can make their way on special teams. And I was kind of having a question, like, do you think he's, capable of doing that?
That's the one thing he's going to have to improve on when he gets to the NFL. He's going to have to be a better blocker. He's going to have to be physical. He's going to have to put his head down in the pile and prove himself. And that's going to be, if he's going to make it or not, I think that's going to be the key for Jake Bobo.
Sounds like Jonathan Casillas wants to get him in the cafeteria and cook him a meal or two based on that reaction. He can maybe give him a little bit more to put on the frame. He is Matt Stevens, former UCLA quarterback. You can hear him on the UCLA radio network as the Bruins radio analyst. Matt, always good going back and forth. Greatly appreciate the time and the insight and look forward to talking down the road.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, guys.
You got
Matt.
it. Our pleasure. So some great insight into two classes thus far. Minnesota, UCLA. We're going to get to Michigan State in a little bit, and an opportunity for you to weigh in between at 201-939-4513, that being the telephone number. You could also use hashtag Giants Chat. You can reach out to us on our individual Twitter handles, and there's so many schools, so many prospects across the board. It's always interesting to hear their stories, but I think the common theme between Minnesota and UCLA is you got two running backs that are appealing, and the million-dollar question is going to be, given the fact that Nick Gates left to go to Washington and John Feliciano is now in San Francisco, do the Giants say to themselves, we want to attack a center early in the draft, or is it more of the mindset, Jonathan, maybe we could get a veteran free agent to come in before training camp starts and we'll have him compete with some of the internal options right now, who Joe Schoen threw out three when he was at the owners meeting. Mm-hmm. He had mentioned Jack Anderson.
Bredesen.
Correct. Mm-hmm. And then I did not hear him mention Josh Azudu. I wouldn't rule him out. No, he didn't throw him out. Mm-hmm. But that to me could be very well a wild card, right, in the mix, given the fact that, he's been somebody that's played all around the line at UNC. But Bredesen, I would say, as well as Jack Anderson are the two guys perhaps in the clubhouse who have some versatility on the interior of the offensive line. But it seems to be a wild card position right now.
Yeah, for sure. And he did mention to see possibly during the draft or after the draft when teams are trying to figure out if they got to let a guy go or not, given that they're bringing in new guys.
Yep.
So that's something that I think you got to pay attention to. But I did pay attention to who he said first. He said Jack Anderson, and the second time he said Bredesen. I don't know.
And Shane Lemieux was also
and Shane Lemieux as well. And I'm trying to see is he telling us something? I'm trying to figure this guy out here. I haven't done it. I haven't done it yet. I haven't figured him out yet. But like I said in prior shows, look, I have my utmost respect for him and the job that he's done, and I believe that he's going to get it done. And I don't know if it's in-house job quite yet. If it is Bredesen or Jack Anderson or Shane Lemieux, we'll see. Yeah.
Well, I was crunching some numbers just to give our audience an idea. And it's not to say that none of these players can actually handle center, but Bredesen's had 9 starts over 3 seasons, none at center. Jack Anderson, 3 starts, none at center. He's been in the league for 2 seasons. Shane Lemieux, 11 starts in 3 seasons, has dealt with injuries, of course, and he has no starts. So those 3 guys combined have no starts at center. Now, that doesn't mean that they haven't practiced. They've taken some snaps, and Bredesen and Anderson have been moved into center throughout a game at times, but we're still talking about, Jonathan, a very, very small sample size based on what's currently on the roster.
Yeah, and I think that's a very concerning, theory, because that's a very important position, the center position.
Absolutely.
You know, a lot of times that they're calling the defensive front down. They're calling the mics who, you know, they're involving the linebackers into the, you know, the coverage of the offensive line. You know, so for me, it's a little concerning. That's why we speak about this almost every time we come on the show. We talk about what is the Giants doing at center. And I think there's a lot of prospects out there. But, you know, my thing is what do you attack in the first round? You know, what do you attack in the first round? You know, is the kid John Michael White, is he available? Do you grab him, you know, early in the first round? Maybe he's available in the second round. You know, you never know. Or is it an in-house job? You know, I think the Giants are doing such a good job and kind of like not really tipping their hand, but kind of just giving guys or giving us as media a little bit to kind of go and run with it, like to do this show, to give us enough to do this show.
Because that's their number one priority,
right,
clearly.
But
they
not
don't care
enough.
about the roster, only us. Yeah.
but I'm saying not enough to actually give us a true idea of what they're going to do. You know, so he kind of keeps us in the dark, and it helps us talk about this a little bit more.
There you go. We're always looking for a helping hand. We're not complaining from that standpoint. No, but there are a lot of different elements to your point to read into. That's why you mentioned you're trying to figure out. But here's the worst thing that I think could happen. You never want to take a player to position because you have a huge void or a hole and sort of sell yourself on the player when deep down inside, Jonathan, you're still very much on the fence.
Right.
And something tells me they're not going to take a center unless they truly love that player and they feel he's justified at that value and maybe could kick out to guard here or there and has some player flexibility.
And, you know, you just brought up a great point. Do you think that the Giants do bring in a guy that only plays center, whether it's through the draft, post-draft? Because a lot of guys, especially with the name that we named, they have versatility to play on the right side or left side at guard and then also at center, even though they don't have that much game experience. Do the Giants bring in a guy basically strictly to play center?
Well, it's an interesting question. I would say, given the players we just went over, and you know all three of them can play multiple guard positions, you have a few other guys on the roster, too, that could kick into guard. I don't know. My answer would be, Jonathan, I don't think it's a major priority that they bring in somebody who plays center in addition to another position. Because I think what you already have on the roster, God forbid there's an injury here or there, you can swap guys out at left guard and right guard. So I would say if you have a player, like we were talking about, John Michael Schmitz, who mainly has been a center in college, if you feel good about him, but you know he's not going to play elsewhere, I'd still feel okay taking him because you need somebody on the roster right now that has experience.
Right. As of right now, the Giants do not have a center, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah, basically. I agree. And that's the thing. I'm trying to figure out not exactly, but the idea or the thought process of where they want to go with this position. We just don't get anything from Joe Shane or Dayball. They don't give us too much. That's why we're here speculating and, you know, giving you guys an opportunity to chime in.
But once again, it's an important position, which is, I emphasized this on yesterday's program. I'm glad to hear you say the same thing. Not that I think that you needed to be sold on the position as a defensive player, but, you know, a lot of people say, oh, well, you know, you could get away with a young center or developing center. Jonathan, look at this division. Look at the defensive fronts, right? The Cowboys, Washington, the Eagles. What is the common element? The interior defensive line, right?
Yep.
You can see a defensive lineman. He could push that center back into the quarterback, and that could be a lost play, lost yardage. So it's not an oversight of a position. I would completely disagree with that.
Definitely. I mean, and it's one of the most invaluable positions on the offense in general. You know, of course, you got to have good receivers, a good skill position. You got to have a good quarterback, you know, but that person that has the ball in his hands before the quarterback, he has the ball in his hands every single play. Defenses understand that too. So if you can fluster or frustrate or get into the pocket of a center and get him frustrated, you literally throw the entire offense off. You know, and that's why it's so important to have a good, sturdy guy at center. Does he have to be older and experienced? Probably not. But he has to be talented and he has to be ready to go. That's for sure.
Because, like you said, it's the intellectual side of things, right? It's not just, is he physical enough to handle the pressure? Of course, that goes without saying. But the fact that he's handling the football on every single play, I mean, he's the line of communication between the quarterback and the rest of the team. Because if something goes wrong with the snap, that's it. Could very well be a lost play. And there are a lot of centers, I'm sure you saw this. I'll bring up a name from just covering the league, Corey Linsley, who was with the Packers, is now with the Chargers. One of the interesting things that he does, and I'm curious, Jonathan, how much you have seen this, he will, when they go into the huddle and the quarterback is yelling out the play, Linsley will turn around and he'll face the defense because he wants to see the alignment. Whereas other centers, you see they're facing the huddle, right?
Right.
But he stays with his back to his teammates to sort of survey the field and then report back to the quarterback. That's a rare occurrence. I don't see that very often, but the reason I'm bringing up that position, the intellect.
I was just about to say that.
Right?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
You're now the extra set of eyes for the QB and the rest of the offense to pick up on things prior to the snap. So don't dismiss that and don't overlook that. That could add so much to what could be a lost play or something that could be a game-changing play.
Yeah, 100%. And you know, he's doing that, like you said, the intellect, but he's gathering intel. He's gathering information on the defense, because a lot of defenses now, they understand that they can move that defensive line and they can fluster the offensive line. So he wants to get, you know, the most information that he can and relay that back to not only offensive line, but to the quarterback as well. So they go in with all of their information on deck. And then if anything changes, at least they have all the information pre-snap before anything else happens, because that's what you want to do for defense. You want to fluster our offense, and you start with their offensive line. You start with their better players, and you start with their offensive line. And you basically do it from the guy that's snapping the ball. If you can get pressure, and the Giants have one of the better D tackles in the NFL, if Dexter Lawrence can fluster a center during a game, that's a big win for the New York Giants.
Oh, yeah.
So, you know, conversely, you want to see the center for the New York Giants being able to not get flustered, being able to hold it down, gather intel, relay the message back to the offensive line and the quarterback so they can have a successful play, because it literally all starts from the center.
Well, because if Dexter Lawrence, for example, if he gets penetration up the gut, now all of a sudden you're allowing your edge rushers to squeeze in the quarterback and the pocket completely collapses. Whereas if you buy your quarterback some time, maybe he can wiggle out of the pocket.
Or step up in the B gap.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Or so there are so many different things that feed off of just the instantaneous snap from the center. That's why, especially in this division, with the personnel you're going up against, you could argue maybe the center's more important in the NFC East
than the tackles.
Correct, in comparison
to
other divisions.
And I mean, that's not taking away anything from the tackles or the defensive ends or pass rushers that play in this division. But you're right, and I think I said this before in one of the previous shows. When you talk about a quarterback that's in rhythm, right, and he's in rhythm and he's hitting stuff, what you want to do is get him off his spot, and the way you do that is by that penetration from the center and guard position. And Daniel Jones, look, I think he does a tremendous job in creating. I think he does a tremendous job in stepping up in the pocket. There was a lot of plays and touchdowns that he threw from stepping up in the pocket. That's from a strong center play, strong interior lineman play. And as of right now, we done said this, the Giants do not have a actual center on the roster. This is a position that they have to address. We don't know if it's in-house quite yet. We don't know if it's going to be through the draft or post-draft, if they can find one of these guys that are maybe, you know, contractually not, you know, going to get what they want after the draft, or, you know, their years are up, or whatever the case may be.
First cut or something like that.
Right, you know, and whatever the case may be. And I think Joe Shane is paying attention to all of that stuff, like he said in the interview previously this week.
Well, one quick example of what you were talking about, you remember the Eagles playoff game. There was a play early in the game where Daniel was trying to step up in the pocket, and he was sacked because he got tripped up because the center and the penetration got to him. So, I mean, there's a textbook example of what we're talking about within the division.
Why you need a solid center and interior offensive lineman.
Yeah, especially with those big boys up front from Philadelphia. Few reminders before we carry on the conversation here on Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. Lance Medow, Jonathan Casillas with you. Giants Auto Podcast. You can subscribe to that. It's on Apple Podcasts or wherever you find your podcast. And there will be tons of interviews leading up to the draft as well as reaction post-draft. We are inching closer to the start of the 2023 season, so Giants fans, take your fandom to the next level with a season ticket membership. Stay connected to the club all year round, not just on game days. Memberships are now available for the 2023 season. To learn more about all the exclusive member benefits, you can visit Giants.com/tickets. Limited inventory is available. And the Giants' official connected TV streaming app, Giants TV, brings original video content and game highlights on demand and direct to Big Blue fans. Giants TV is free. It's on Apple TV, Roku, Amazon Fire TV, and the Giants mobile app. So multiple items at your disposal to consume Giants TV. One of the other positions that came up in terms of the two teams that we've already looked at under the microscope, and we're going to get to Michigan State in a little bit, is running back. And you brought up Saquon, still on the franchise tag. Joe Shane mentioned that there hasn't necessarily been any major progress. They are continuing to keep communication, but they're okay. And this is my interpretation of what Joe Shane had to say, where if Saquon's got to play on the tag, they're comfortable at that number, Jonathan, which is just around that $10 million mark based on the other numbers that they've punched. But I guess what I'm getting at is you brought back Mac Breida. Gary Brightwell is still on a rookie contract. You could argue there's room for another running back. I don't think that's a stretch. But you also may want to think about if Saquon is playing on the tag, and nobody's got a crystal ball, right? Nobody knows what 2024 is going to bring. Does that amp up making a move for a running back to protect yourself? I'm not talking about now this season. I'm just thinking about beyond this season and what you want to have on your roster and the versatility at that position. Because remember, Brightwell is getting closer to the end of his rookie deal, and Breida is only on a short-term deal as a veteran free agent here.
Yeah, and I talked about this before. Just add in depth. When you got a good player sitting at that, let's say, second round, you got one of these good running backs that maybe has a first round grade or a lower second round grade, and you're sitting at that second round like, hey, man, this is a better, one of the better players we have on our board. Maybe he's not coming in to play running back right away, but to contribute on special teams.
Absolutely.
And I know that's a high draft pick to go ahead and do that, but a lot of guys that made their way, man, and I'm always going to be a proponent to talk about special teams. A lot of these guys need to come in. We talked to the guy earlier about one of the wide receivers over in UCLA. And look, he's probably going to be a lower draft pick if he's drafted. And when he comes in, he's a smaller frame guy. He's probably going to come into a roster that has 3 to 4 already proven wide receivers. He's going to have to prove himself on special teams. So I don't see the Giants not looking at running back or not trying to bring in a running back because, like you said, Saquon has basically a 1-year deal if he chooses to sign it because he still didn't sign it. He didn't sign it yet. He didn't agree to it yet. And the Giants want to work out a long-term deal with him. And I think look, I don't want to, call a man foolish, but I think it's foolish for him not to sign a long-term deal, knowing his history, and
security.
And it sucks that he's in the position that he's in, given that he thinks he's one of the better running backs in the league. He thinks he deserves $15 to $16 million a year, and I'm not here to argue that. What I'm here is to say, Saquon, and I know, look, we all want security. We talked about this last week. The Giants, they want him in-house. And John Mara said he wants him to retire as a New York Giant, So, look, I'm not telling him to take less money or nothing like that, but, I think for him, it's like, bruh, let's figure out a deal. Hopefully you can find something that really works for you to get you signed and get you set up for life, not just for 1 year, for life. And you got to look at that because the career for an NFL player, especially a running back, is not that long. We hear a lot of household names, the Adrian Petersons of the world, the guys that have played, 8, 9, 10 plus years.
Rare.
But a lot of guys, most guys play 2, 3, 4 years max. And Saquon is going into his 5th year, right? He already has exceeded past the average and the minimum for running backs. He's probably doubled that, So, and with his injury history,
it's actually
man,
his 6th year, by the way.
Right, you're going to 6 years. So he's doubled, if not tripled, the average for running backs in the NFL. And it's like you're not guaranteed another year. You're only, as of right now, contractually, he's only guaranteed this year. Let's do something. I really want him to get a deal. I really want him to play for the Giants forever. Hopefully, I'm going to be around too, and I can cover this guy. One of the most tremendous running backs in the NFL, if not the best running back in the NFL from what we've seen him as a healthy running back. He's one of the greatest guys. And I look for, hopefully, he can secure a big-time deal. But the Giants, they shouldn't look away from that position. I think they should, if they got a guy in free agency or through the draft, I think they should bring him in here because he would add value to this team.
I'm completely with you because, once again, the draft is not about 2023. The draft is about years beyond that. You're not just drafting for 1 year. So I'm completely with you. Now, do you take a running back in the 2nd round, as you mentioned? To me,
might be a reach. That might be a reach.
Seem a little bit high. But, when you start getting into round 4 and there's good value there, absolutely. I do think, though, the appeal of having somebody, and I'm not saying that Zach Charbonnet is going to be there, who we were just talking about from UCLA, but somebody that could catch the ball out of the backfield as much as run between the tackles. You want that versatile option because, once again, hypothetical situation. I'm not saying anybody's not going to be here in 2024, but you have to prepare accordingly. If you do move on from Saquon or you don't get anything long-term done, you want somebody on the depth chart who has I'm not saying he's Saquon Barkley boxed in.
I get what you're saying.
But you want some of those skill sets, right? Apparent. That's why, I don't just want a big bruiser that's going to run people over. If I'm going to go after a running back in this draft, I want him to, and you're not necessarily going to find maybe a 3-down back or somebody that is built like that, but maybe has some of the scratching of the surface to be a receiver as much as he is a threat on the ground.
You want to have a presence in the run game and also a presence in the passing game as well, and not just running routes out the backfield, but pass pro. That is a huge thing, and that was huge for Saquon early in his career. People, they said the knock on him was his pass pro ability.
And he's come a long way.
And he has come a long way. He shored it up, and he showed that he can be a 3-down running back for the New York Giants. Out the backfield, of course, running the ball on first and second down and those tough yardage, third and short, second and short type of downs, but then also pass pro. Because at the end of the day, look, this league has evolved into a passing league. So when you're on offense, the receivers have to go out and catch that ball. And if you're not running a route, you better be able to protect your quarterback.
Well, that's why we were asking these experts who cover these teams about pass protection, right? I mean, you can watch anybody on film, Jonathan. You know this as a running back. He's got speed. He's got elusiveness. Well, what about when it's a third down and they're not asking him to run out or do anything?
Yep.
He has to be the extra line of defense.
Or they're going to take him right off the field.
Yep.
They're going to take him right off. And that's not what you want. And I think the Giants have a good stable of running backs right now. You got to mix a little bit of youth and a lot of experience with all three of these running backs that the Giants have on the roster right now. And Brightwell can play on special teams too.
I was waiting for you to comment for that. Well, you were angling there. I'm surprised you didn't bring it up. I mean, you're talking about a guy that plays all 4 special teams units.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you have somebody on the roster. I will say this. I was very impressed, and this may be a very tiny facet of this past season. I thought Brightwell showed us a lot.
Oh, yeah.
Right? When he got opportunities to run.
6-yard carry, I feel like every time he got the ball.
It was like instantaneous.
Yep. And Breida too.
No, Breida too. But Brightwell, we had seen such a small sample size, right? Because he barely got onto the field.
Yep.
Every time his number was called, it wasn't an afterthought.
Right.
I felt he made the most of his limited snaps, and you like to see that out of a young guy. I mean, clearly he shouldn't need motivation.
Right.
I mean, he barely played as a running back, but for him to get his number called and to excel in that department, I don't overlook that. And I'm sure that caught the attention of the coaching staff as well.
Absolutely. He looked physically ready, and more importantly, he looked mentally ready. And like you said, he's a 4-core teamer. He's playing on all 4 special teams, and sometimes you could become a little bit lackadaisical for your offensive and defensive duties when you're playing that much special teams.
Sure.
But he didn't miss a beat. He did not miss a beat. Every time he got in the game, I feel like he got a 6-yard carry. No matter if it was his first carry or his second carry, he's getting at least 5-6 yards on the carry. And then when you look back and you say, man, Saquon needs to take a rest because Saquon has 20 touches in the game so far and he's played 80% of the snaps, you need a guy that could come in and not drop down a level of play at that position.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest fear for any coaching staff. We want to give our guy a breather. The problem is, are we throwing away plays?
Right.
Or are we still
Or
being
it
productive?
goes right to a passing play because you got the best running back out the game.
Which means you become more predictable, right? You want the defense to know, okay, Brightwell's in the game. Yeah, we're going to actually considering running the football. And I just thought that was noticeable, but maybe not discussed enough from a big picture perspective. That's more of a reason why you can grab somebody in the late rounds, and little by little you move them along, and then year 2, year 3, all of a sudden, you start to reap the rewards. So that shouldn't be overlooked. And I've brought this name up. A guy who you know very well, Dwayne Harris, who made a name for himself, played all 4 special teams units. You make a tackle here or there over the course of a game, that could add up from a value standpoint.
Oh, 100%. And he was very valuable. He made the Pro Bowl at special teams. And man, I'll be watching film back from 16, 15, 16, and 17. Dwayne Harris.
You like to revisit your glory days, right?
Sometimes.
Okay, at least be
sometimes.
Okay.
Odell's cool, too. He pops up all the time, But Dwayne Harris, and bringing in a guy like Dwayne Harris, who's basically strictly special teams, but when you put him at wide receiver, of course he can make catches, but he's blocking. And that's the kind of an underrated element of the wide receiver position, of that kind of special teams guy. And there's a lot of guys on this roster right now that play wide receiver. The Giants kind of been stacking. They've been having a busy offseason and signing a lot of wide receivers.
Yep.
So it's like, of course, Sterling can block. What guys are that are not going to be 70 catches, 50, 60 catches on the year, but are going to play 50% of the snaps, they're going to have to do a good job not only on special teams but blocking as well. So when you look at these prospects coming out of college, you don't look for them just to play that one position. You talked about the offensive line earlier and adding that versatility. When I look at skill positions and big skill positions like linebacker and tight end, I'm looking at right away, can they play special teams? If they can't play on defense right away because they might be buried in the depth chart, politics, whatever the case may be, or experience, right, lack thereof, can they play special teams? And we've talked about this before. The Giants need to upgrade their special teams unit. And the way you do that, you add depth at key skill and big skill positions, and you have them, which guys that are potential starters, possibly can be really good contributors to defensive offense. All of a sudden, they're balling on special teams, and now you have a core special teams unit full of talented guys. Not bottom of the roster guys, talented guys that just can't play because maybe this starter is all pro like a Saquon Barkley in front of him.
Because you have an overwhelming amount of depth at that position.
Exactly.
And that's a good thing to have.
Absolutely.
The issue is, and I think this is something you can relate to, special teams, a lot of it comes from desire.
Oh, man.
To want to be involved in that facet. And I think, and once again, I'm curious your perspective, Jonathan, having played special teams, is I think maybe one of the biggest rude awakenings for most guys coming out of college is it's not a matter of can they digest the scheme and can they contribute on offense or defense. It's maybe they go from not playing any special teams in college, right? Because they were a star player. Or ever. And now all of a sudden, if you really want to get on the field, they're going to throw you out there maybe on 2 of the teams, 3 of the teams, and A, can you catch on, and B, do you want to go out there? Because how many times have you seen you're an offensive player, you don't tackle. Now all of a sudden they're asking you to go out and tackle.
Run out on kickoff and the most important play on punt, right? And punt, and I look, a lot of guys that I work with, younger guys, most guys, especially if they don't play offensive line, they've never did a kick step in their life. And they don't even teach that on college punt pro. They're doing like the spread out punt, the spread punt, and they're like kind of like kicking it to the side. I forgot what that kick is called. They're doing that type of stuff. NFL, they got a real pass pro like tackles and guards like an offensive line.
Oh, yeah.
And a lot of these guys don't have that experience. So one thing I try to tell them about is if you can train a guy to play on the punt team, you're literally teaching offensive line. You're teaching pass pro like a running back, and then you teach like getting off of blocks like a defensive line.
How
or
to shed them.
Right, shed a block destruction, that we call it as a linebacker position. And then you're running down the field like a wide receiver, and then you have to break down and make an open field tackle like a safety, like a DB. You literally incorporate every position on that punt play. If you can train a guy to play on punt, he can have some success on special teams in the NFL.
And he can carve out a lengthy career, too.
Oh, man.
But it's interesting the way you put it, that you're combining 4 or 5 positions really in one when you play on special teams. That's why if you're looking for the versatility of the roster, we always talk about what can the wide receiver do, what can the running back do. More often than that, you should start at special teams.
Look at that punt team.
Yeah.
Look at the athletes on that punt team, especially at the tackle and wing positions. When I was playing here in New York, I was, kind of a special teams guy. Then when I took over full-time as a starter, every now and again they'll plug me in at that tackle or wing position. But you know who played wing as an all-pro safety? Landon Collins. He was an all-pro safety. Yeah, he was young, but it wasn't that we didn't have a guy that could play that position. It was just that valuable of a position because field position in the NFL is very vital. Kickoff's not so important because a lot of touchbacks, but that punt, and that changing of the field position, there's hitting yardage that come up in terms of when you looking at the total yardage, the hitting yardage is, man, we don't lost some yardage in punt because of a lack thereof coverage-wise, right? And that's why I'm always so like harping on special teams because it doesn't really get talked about a bunch. And I watch a lot of shows, Lance. Nobody really talks about not returners. I'm talking about coverage guys that are frontline guys on kickoff and kick return, guys that are pressuring on punt return, and then guys that are really living that 4 or 5 position punt position that they got to basically know they got to be a tremendous football player to run down on punt. You got to block, you got to protect, and then you got to shed, and then you got to run and be an athlete and then make a tackle in an open field. Very, very difficult to do. And if you look at a team, you look at their punt coverage unit. And if they have a great punt coverage unit, they probably have a great team.
Well, because it feeds off of a lot of the players that are on that unit. And to answer your question, that's why people tune into Big Blue Kickoff Live, to hear analysis like that. So you don't have to say other programs.
There you go.
This is the program on an island. This is where we give you the nuts and bolts of special teams.
You got to cut that up,
coverage.
Pearson.
Yeah, they go. Now, if that's not a promo, I don't know what is. He's choking on his drink as you just mentioned that. He's spitting up as we speak. He got so emotional over that. We're making everybody's job very easy in terms of the production team. We add value from that standpoint. Yes, a very versatile program here as we move along. It looks like we may not be able to squeeze in Michigan State here on the program. We will definitely get to that class perhaps on a future program, but good to have you aboard here on Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. I want to jump before we wrap up here, Jonathan, and still an opportunity to weigh in if you do want to join in on the conversation at 201-939-4513. But Joe Schoen, John Mara, and Brian Dable, they all spoke at the owners' meetings. And Shane's biggest takeaway was about center, was about Saquon's contract, but he also talked about the emphasis of the goal this offseason. I'm not saying that this was a rude awakening. I think most people understood what they were going to address. But when he was talking about Darren Waller, he described him as a blue chip player, right? And that has to do with how they grade players on their board, whether it be the draft and free agency. And the goal is to obviously bring in players that can help elevate your quarterback, but stand out because – as we were talking about in special teams, there's so many different layers to a player. Well, it's no different than how they view Darren Waller. You know, this is not a guy who's just going to be utilized on the line of scrimmage and they're going to utilize his frame. No, this is going to be basically an extended wide receiver because he has a wide receiver skill set in the tight end body and structure, and that's why they felt the value was so good. Yes, there's risk in terms of injury, but if he stays healthy, what you're adding to the roster for a compensatory third-round pick, to me, it's a no-brainer. And I think that's what at least he was getting at when he was talking with reporters and the media.
And you look at Darren Waller's body of work and what he's done. I mean, he's matched up against a lot of safeties, corners, number one coverage guys, and he's beaten them, you know, time after time and time after again. You know, and I didn't look at it just as a prospect, as an off-season move to get a guy like that. But I look at during the NFL season, when you do a scouting report, you put guys in certain categories, and Darren Waller would be in that elite player category where you're going to talk about him in the beginning of the meeting to talk about who you're playing the next week.
Who you need to focus
He's
on.
The first guy you're talking about, especially for the New York Giants. And now you throw him in with Saquon Barkley. You throw him in with Daniel Jones' capabilities. Now the Giants have basically a trio of talent that they can, you know, you can get guys scared now. You know, when we talked about this last year, a lot of receivers for the Giants, none of them truly scared me. Saquon Barkley is a guy that scares me. Now Daniel Jones, what he did in the playoff game, the first playoff game, he can scare some guys. Darren Waller's definitely one of them players that's scary. So I think they did a tremendous job in finding him and going into I guess it was the combine, and they had the conversations with the Raiders,
Ziegler,
right?
Correct, the Raiders general
with the
manager
Raiders,
said, yeah.
And he was like, you know, he was able to have that conversation with him, and they presented Darren Waller to him, which nobody knew about Darren Waller, I guess, being on the trading block or whatever the case may be. But that's what's so important, and that's what really goes into, like, these special little meetings. And like, it's not just for us to watch these college guys, it's for the GMs and the coaches to get together and rub elbows and see what they can do to either help each other out or see what they can help their franchise out or organization out, and seeing if they can grab a guy, a blue chip, a blue player, a primetime player like a Darren Waller that's not going to play no special teams, that's going to contribute right away and be a tremendous player for the New York Giants.
That's why I saved this part of the conversation after we addressed special teams, because I know it wasn't going to
getting that conversation.
Correct, exactly. Want to make sure we have some smooth transitions on this program. But in all seriousness, I think you bring up a great point, because Joe Schoen was talking about, you talk to GMs at the Combine, Jonathan, because you want to get an idea of the availability of some of their players. You know, it's not as if there's a website that these GMs go on and say, okay, you know, these 5 guys are available. No, you talk shop. And Ziegler finds out from Joe Schoen who may be available on the Giants roster and vice versa. And Waller's name came up. Okay, so Joe Schoen mentioned you go back to your front office team and you say, hey, I was talking with the Raiders. They said Darren Waller is available depending on the price. What do we think about him? the pro personnel staff. What did you see on film when you were studying up on the Raiders or previous matchups? Because remember, he comes from Buffalo. They're playing the Raiders more often than the Giants are because the Giants are only getting the Raiders once every 4 years. And that's how the dialogue plays out. And then you put 2 and 2 together and you say, okay, what are we willing to sacrifice to bring in a player like that?
And also factored in our training staff. When he was talking about his injury history, he factored in, that Ronnie Barnes and his training staff here just won an Ed Block Courage Award for the training staff. So he factored that in as well. And you don't really hear guys talking about the training staff, especially when it comes to combine and meetings and stuff like that.
They're very important.
And there's something into that face-to-face meeting. Because usually when you're making transactions with other teams, that's over the phone, whatever, via FaceTime. We could do FaceTime now. But it's something about that in-person meeting that you can get a lot of stuff done. And that's what, I think that's what, if it wasn't for the combine, we would never got Darren Waller. That's what I think.
Completely with you. Well, that's why, not to get off topic, but, there's been some whispers about, especially from the NFLPA side, DeMaurice Smith, the executive director, he came out publicly and said, the combine is unfair. You're forcing players to demonstrate their skill set, and some guys are not invited. And my reaction was, listen, I understand he's coming from the NFLPA perspective. He has to represent their needs. But the benefit from the team's perspective, even the player's perspective, what other event do you have where you have all 32 teams, Jonathan, present for everybody at their disposal, whether it be agents, whether it be executives, whether it be veteran players, whether it be rookies? That holds value.
Yes, absolutely.
Because there's so many different elements in play. That's why no matter how you want to spin it, whatever side of the fence you're on, I don't see them ever eliminating this event. Putting aside, of course, the financial value because it's an event and you can broadcast it and this and that.
And they're always making money, baby.
Correct. But the value from the team standpoint, to get everybody in the same location, show me another time on the calendar.
Everything's digital now. Like we said, we can communicate through, whatever type of, podcasts and whatever, video, but there's nothing like in person. A lot of deals get done by the shaking of hands in person. And, I think that's what happened. And I think you're right. The combine's not going nowhere. No. Maybe it changed locations. I don't know why it's in Indianapolis all the time. What's that about?
Middle of the country. Easy for everybody to
understandable.
get to.
It's a little cold, though. It's a little cold.
Well, but you're indoors pretty much the entire time.
It was cold when
anyway.
I was up there. It was cold, man. Inside was a little cold. It was like 60 degrees inside. That's cold. Now, for me, I was coming from Wisconsin. It wasn't that bad.
I was going to say,
I'm
just saying, coming from a guy that played in the Big Ten.
It'd be nice to play like in the middle of the country, like somewhere Tampa or somewhere.
Bay.
Tampa Bay's not in the middle of the country.
No, but I was getting at your resume. I felt we were getting more in this direction.
I would
just
love
want to go to the climates that appeased you.
But maybe it has a little bit to do with there's not too much to do in Indianapolis compared to Tampa, compared to Houston.
Well, but see, I'm looking at it.
Am I going to get myself in trouble?
No. You're not going to get yourself in trouble. But I'm fascinated to at least peel back the layers of this. The reason why I don't think anyone in NFL circles is looking at what's around in the areas because they're busy negotiating, evaluating prospects. They don't have time to go to the beach.
No, I'm talking about just the weather.
Yeah, but you're looking at it
was snowing. Flights were canceled.
Okay, well, we don't want that. Okay, we want to avoid that.
Right.
So that's one good reason you've given to avoid Indianapolis of all, to make sure there's no delays in terms of getting into Indy.
It was delays when I was there. A lot of flights were delayed. And so, honestly, the weather has changed a lot in the last 15 years. Like,
absolutely.
We
gave a science lesson here on this program.
Just saying,
global warming, is that where you're going?
We have a 30-degree day today, and tomorrow's supposed to be like 70 degrees.
I don't know. And I just came from South Carolina because I was calling games.
How was the weather there?
It was like 80 degrees. I wanted to walk out with a pair of shorts and polo. Well, there you go. So I'm giving you a little bit of a teaser.
Shorts next week.
Yes. Well, and then I come back and I want to put my winter coat on. It's crazy. Crazy weather. Well, you never know what you're going to get out of us here on Big Blue Kickoff Live, as we will continue to break down the jet stream and what direction it comes from, the pros and cons of the combine, what to look forward to the draft, and whether or not the Giants should draft a center and a running back. If you're going to tell me you watch this entire program and you didn't get enough versatility, people, I don't know what to tell you, all right? I don't know. It's a lost cause at this point. Jonathan, it's always a pleasure going back and forth.
Always.
Absolutely. Look forward to doing it again, as tomorrow we'll be back up and running and we'll start to preview a handful of other schools as we get closer to the 2023 NFL Draft. And a reminder, today's episode of Big Blue Kickoff Live, it's part of the Giants platforms everywhere and Giants.com/podcast. For Jonathan Casillas, I'm Lance Medow. Stay locked to Giants.com for all the latest. We'll be back up and running on Friday right here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Have a good one.